Hey, Andrew, what's up, man?
Good, how are you?
Nice to see you in person. How's life?
Yeah, pretty good. Nice to see you too.
Good.
Everything's
Hey,
cool.
it's great to catch up with you again. You're an absolute regular around here on Neon Jazz.
Well, thank you. I appreciate you hanging out with me and checking out my music.
Yeah, I love it. I love the new album, and I think the one thing above and beyond anything else at this point is that it was so long that artists had to wait to release recordings and be at a point where you could actually perform this live and get back to some level of regularity. So I think these albums, especially now, are really ushering in kind of a new time, a new era, so to speak. And with that being said, how did you get through COVID? Now that we're like officially at some point where we can call it post, how did you get through it?
Um, that's a good question. I almost feel like it's a distant memory.
That's good.
So, I was just playing at a festival in Stowe for a couple days and talking to some folks there. We all sort of talked about our COVID projects, and I was talking with the great saxophone player John Ellis, and we both were talking about saxophone mouthpieces. So this might be a very dry and boring subject for most people, but I went really down a rabbit hole. I've been playing the same mouthpiece for like 20, 25 years, and I've always thought about looking for a mouthpiece that had what's called like a wider tip opening, a wider facing, which means the gap between where the reed is and the tip of the mouthpiece is bigger. Um, and a lot of the teachers that I studied with, like George Garzone, like he plays a huge tip facing. So I thought I would start to experiment with larger facing. So I just started buying mouthpieces. And, there's a famous mouthpiece that the great saxophone player Joe Lovano plays, which was a wooden mouthpiece. So I was experimenting with these two wooden mouthpieces from a great mouthpiece maker named Fred LaBelle. Um, I found a couple of those online, bought them, had the facings opened up, and just went through a whole. I mean, I could. They're all sitting over. I'm in my studio in my basement. They're all sitting over there. One day my wife came down. She's like, "Why do all these boxes keep like? What are in these little boxes that keep showing up at the house?" So that was one of the things that kind of got me through COVID. And the reason I did that during that time is it's very painful as a saxophone player to like, especially for someone like me who's been playing the same mouthpiece for a really long time, to change. Like, but because there were no real gigs, nothing, no one was going to hear you. It was really the perfect time because you could spend 4 months experimenting with a new setup, new gear, new mouthpiece, etc. So that's kind of one of the things I did during COVID to kind of keep occupied and really experiment with some new sound ideas and new approaches to how I was thinking about sound and the kind of sound that I wanted, or the kind of direction I wanted to go in with my sound.
Isn't that kind of a metaphor for what we lived through, though? I mean, there was a level of us that had to reinvent and had to come up with some new things and something to preoccupy us. Whether you were getting a new mouthpiece or someone like I know for us, we had a drive to go to nature centers just to kind of keep that fluidity of regular life going because that was the most jaunting thing out of all of it was that we got to this point where all of these things, not one, not two, not three, everything that we knew was in one way or another rearranged,
Hmm. Yeah, absolutely.
you know? So your latest album, The Speed of Time, which is funny because, you talked about how it's a distant memory, but I keep hearing people talk about how the whole timeline of that 3 years melted together. It's hard to kind of piece what went where.
Yeah, so that was part of the idea about this record in a way, is that thinking about sometimes things just like, oh my God, how much longer is this going to go on for? And then other times, not just connected with the pandemic, but with, like, for instance, our kids. Like, we have a 19-year-old who starting a second year at college, and you kind of think like, whoa, wow, how did we get here so quickly?
Yeah.
So that idea of the perception of time and how it can just change. It can feel like it's flying by, and it can feel like it's crawling by. So, and that's something that I've been interested in, not only with, thinking about in terms of oneself living their life, but also musically. So I've been doing a lot of experimenting with, meter and implying different meters. So you feel like you're in one meter, but then you bring another musical element in, either using a different rhythmic device or accents, whatever the case may be, and having another perception of another meter, like at a different layer. So there might be a primary meter, then like a secondary meter above that or below that. So the listener can kind of change their focus from one thing to the next. Sort of listening on two planes at the same time. It's hard to explain verbally, but so I've been interested in that too, and there's some of that on this record. Um, the first track has this this recurring bass line. So half the band is basically playing in one meter, and then the other half of the band, like John and Gary, are playing in one meter, and Tom and I are playing in another meter at the same time. Now, if you're listening to the tune, I don't know if 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 the a lay person would be able to track that, but it does create this sort of interesting kind of stability slash instability that I think anyone could hear.
So, the one thing that I'm interested in too is how good does it feel to be able to have this music out, to be able to perform live? We're entering kind of a new era of getting away from being locked up and not having things come out in the way that we've been used to. Is there a level of this that's very gratifying?
Yeah, I mean it's gratifying every time I do a project. Um, you know, this is like the most important thing I think that I do is making records. I love writing a new book of compositions. I love hiring musicians who are going to be able to realize that music in new and interesting ways. So anytime I do one of these, because it's a lot of work to from start to finish to get these things out there. So it's always gratifying. And this one, the band, I'm particularly enamored with because they're all just such master musicians, and they also, especially Tom, I think he forces me to play in a way that I don't normally play, which is something, at my stage of the game, I've been doing this for a long time. Anytime you're around someone who takes you out of your comfort zone and, forces you to come up with something new, that's to me a huge bonus. So, playing with him is always such a real pleasure and a real treat, and it's uncomfortable sometimes. Sometimes it's, but I really like that. I really like being surprised. Surprise in music is something that's really important to me. I don't like listening to music that I know exactly where it's headed and what's around the next corner. I don't want to know what's around the next corner. So these guys, and Gary is one of the greatest piano players and and accompanists and soloists, and John just has the deepest groove and such an incredibly organic, earthy sound. So you know, it's gratifying to get to play with those guys and get to make music with them.
So creatively speaking, when you do feel uncomfortable, that is when the growth happens. That is when the maturity and the wisdom seeks in.
Absolutely, yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely. And if you talk to, um, and I talk to my peers about this, like, sometimes a common refrain at this stage of the game is, "Oh, I keep playing this, I keep playing the same stuff." So sometimes a great way away from that or around that is to surround yourself with musicians who think differently and play differently and are super creative, and that can, I get, sometimes force you out of your comfort zone, so you're not going through the same motions, and you're finding new avenues to express yourself.
So what are you ultimately hoping the listener gets from this album?
Wow, that's a tough question. I mean, I just hope people like the music and enjoy it, on one level. I mean, I don't profess to have some sort of, idea of the listener having some sort of profound epiphany or experience when they listen to the music. Like, oh, I'm going to reassess my idea of how I think about time. No, that's not really what I'm after. I just want people to have a great listening experience and be moved by the music in some way, shape, or form.
So what about live shows? What are you doing with live uh shows? How's that happening right now?
Yeah, I mean, everything seems to be like I just said. We just got back from playing at that Stowe Festival, which is a really great festival. Um, so it was fun to be around all those musicians, and yeah, things seem to be sort of back in the groove. I mean, I don't think there's as many venues that have sort of, I think more venues closed than sort of reopened or opened, but certainly people are playing again. So we have some gigs coming up this week on Wednesday, and we're doing a CD release on Friday. So yeah, so that's kind of come back, and that's really gratifying and always nice to be out playing for folks and feeling the energy of a real of an audience, like a person to person audience rather
Yeah.
than a virtual audience. So yeah, I mean, I've sort of stopped even thinking about um, how things were the last few years, and I think we finally turned the corner on all that.
Well, and I guess another part of that is that there was a lot of musicians that left big cities, young musicians that were in school that thought, I need to get another career. This isn't happening. I don't know when it's going to happen again. But
Hmm.
it seems like everything's come back even stronger than it was before. A lot of students stayed in school. Lots of people were able to teach, which was a saving grace of the community. What's
Hmm.
your perspective on how strong things are now?
That's a great question. I mean, I think it's like anything. I think it's evolved. It evolved, and it's still evolving. And I'm not quite sure um, we know where it's going to ultimately land. I don't think it's going to be back in the same place that it was, but yeah, I think it's still evolving. I agree with you that there is a greater modicum of stability, but there's still some instability. I think again that stems from the fact that there just aren't the same number of venues. But hopefully, new things pop up, and new things are going to pop up all the time. I guess for me, ultimately, there's a certain number of people who are going to feel a compulsion to do this, no matter what the circumstances are, and they'll figure out a way to make it work. Um, Certainly, those numbers are probably lower than they once were because it's just not viable for everyone to be trying to do this. But artists, musicians, they're always going to find a way to make art. Um, they might not be well compensated for it, which is, in my estimation, a massive tragedy. And the way we treat artists in this country is just, it's abysmal. You look at the way a lot of other countries uh, looked after their artists during the pandemic compared to the United States, and it's atrocious. I mean, it's ridiculous. Um, but here we are.
Whenever I interview Canadians, I'm always so happy with the fact that, their government does really hold the arts up. They give a lot of grants. They did get a lot of good monies. They got socialized healthcare. There's a lot of things where they put their money where their mouth is. I can't keep shaking this idea of the mouthpiece thing. It'd be really interesting to write a book to like talk to Joe Lovano about how long he used his and why he picked it, and even Charlie Parker because he had a plastic sax for a while. I think it'd be interesting to get into mouthpieces and horns and players and how they selected it. And like for you, I don't realize that. To me, as much as you say it's a rabbit hole and it's dry, as someone that doesn't play an instrument, I find it fascinating. I mean,
Mm,
Sonny Rollins, like what he used to do, he used to play by the bridge and he used to play with the Echoes, and Eric Dolphy would go out and play with the Birds in LA. And there's so many levels of that because you do have a relationship with that horn. It's almost like it's an entity. It's not just this piece of metal. You know what I'm saying?
yeah, no. To me, the thing is just an extension of myself at this point. Like it's so ingrained. Um, it just feels like when I pick it up, it's just an extension. It just like fits. Do you know what
Yeah.
I mean? It's like another appendage.
Yeah.
Yeah, that no, that would be interesting. I mean, I guess the tricky part about writing a book like that is sometimes um, it would just get to be so inside baseball that
Yeah.
I don't know how many folks would want to be uh, reading about that. Just on the topic of Sonny too, since you brought Sonny up, I don't know if you've read the new Sonny Rollins biography, but
No,
for anyone, yeah, it is it's a masterpiece.
I need
Adrian,
to.
yeah, Adrian Levy, he spent like 5 years writing this thing.
Wow.
It's really really good. Uh, it's in the same it's in the same league as like that Monk biography that Robin Kelly wrote, which is also a total masterpiece. It was great, and the thing that struck me is, I mean, obviously, I I've read a lot about Sonny Rollins. He's a huge hero, um, and I held him in pretty much the highest regard you can for an artist of his stature. But what this biography brought home to me was he just went up a few notches as a human, and it really humanized him. And it's not all unicorns and rainbows. It talks about him as a full person, with faults and great qualities. And the great qualities outweigh the faults, but there were, some things in his youth that he was involved with that were unsavory. And but man, it's just an incredible treatise. And if you're at all into Sunny, or if you're into jazz, it's an absolute must read. It's a long book. I mean, it's a good 500 600 pages, but it is and the notes, like, unfortunately the notes are not in the book. You have to actually go online to read all of his annotations to each chapter. Again, totally worth it. This cat did his homework, and it's exhaustive, and it's beautiful. It's a
You
beautiful book.
he was one of my first interviews that like was
Oh
was a
wow.
really was a really big one. And I was going to Colorado this summer with my wife. We actually went back to where we had our honeymoon in 2019, and she wanted to listen to the interview then. She loves Sunny, and we never
Okay.
did. So we finally did as we were crossing Colorado, the border, and I hadn't listened to it for so long, but I was like, wow, this cat was stellar. He's so humble. It's like the higher up you go, the food chain, the cooler and more grounded they are. And a real quick story about him too. There's a musician in San Francisco. Sometimes the Rolodex gets too full and I can't remember, but he was a relative. I think he was a cousin. And he said that there was a time after 9/11 happened when the buildings fell that he went out with his horn and a TV reporter went up and was interviewing him and didn't know who he was. It's like, what are you doing, sir? And he was like, I'm trying to give a little bit of hope to these people out here and playing the horn. And this person had no idea it was Sonny Rollins. And
Wow.
he literally picked up his horn and went out. And while everybody was in extreme duress, played his horn to soothe everybody. And that's the Sonny way. That's the kind of cat he is.
Yeah. No, he was super generous, and just so interesting as a almost like as a Zen figure. Like his values and his morality and his spirituality. That's, again, these are things that I knew sort of a um, surface level about those types of things, but deep down, I didn't know how deep it went. And he's really an incredible human being. So I really urge all of your listeners to check out that book, because it's really beautiful.
He's the reason. Him and Dr. Lonnie Smith are the reason why I came up with the idea of the Jazz Jedi Council, like all of them in Cloud City,
You're
sitting
right.
around a table, and they are the deeply spiritual. They are beyond this plane of thought that we have. There is a level of them that's magic, that's so good to be around for a second.
Yeah,
Lou Donaldson, Randy Weston was that way. They just
sure.
all emit this just such a kind spiritual sense. I have a feeling that I watched a special on John Coltrane that he was definitely that way. There was a level of humanness and divinity that was ultra with him.
Yeah. The other thing I'm really looking forward to while we're on this jag of, the Titans is this new Wayne documentary on Amazon Prime. I don't know if you've seen it yet, but
I've seen the preview.
yeah, everyone's been just raving about it. So I can't wait to dive into that too.
Yeah.
I'm just looking for some time where I can sit down and just, again, I was talking to another great musician, Colin Stranahan, at this festival, and he sat down to watch it thinking he'd watch like the first episode, and he just like 3 hours later he's still checking it out. He's like, it's really deep. So I really look forward to that.
See, the mouthpiece thing got us into a rabbit hole.
Sure, yeah, of
I
course. It
love it.
always does. It always does.
Andrew, if anyone wants to pick up the brand new album, find out about any live shows, anything about your world, where can they go?
They can go to my website, andrewrathbun.com, and just, so I picked up so these are sort of seem like they're going the way of the dodo.
Right.
Like, hand out a CD to someone, and they're like, oh, I wish I could play it, or the last place people seem to be playing CDs is in their car. Like, so it's streaming everywhere. It's on Spotify, it's on YouTube Music, it's on Apple Music. It doesn't drop till September 15th, so that's when it'll be available to stream. But yeah, that's where people can check it out.
So I get so many CDs in the mail. I've historically at Halloween give kids out. I rip the tracks down I need and listen to it and figure it needs to move along its way like a library book. And the
Hmm.
kids just look at it like I'm, some
Yeah,
kind of like space person that
yeah,
just landed with these things. In fact, one of my son's friends asked me one time, he was like, what do I do with this?
yeah,
I was like, oh no, that's
yeah,
where we're at,
yeah.
you know.
I mean, I still like them. I still
I
buy
do
them.
too.
Yeah, but I understand that, you know, the next generation is it's like anything. It's like LPs in a way for, folks who grew up in the '90s. Like, what's this?
Yeah.
So I get it, but I still have a soft spot for them. I like to open them. I like to put them in the CD player. I like to read the liner notes. I like to read who's on the record, etc., etc. It's just a different. For me, it's just a different mode of listening. I mean, I like streaming too. I have subscriptions to streaming services and do use them, but I find that when I'm definitely at home, I lean more towards actually pulling the CDs off the shelf and checking them out.
It's an immersive experience. I actually prefer to put it in the car, and my son's been groomed with that. Like, just driving, and there's something about watching the world go by and absorbing the music and feeling it. It's just, it's a good feeling. Andrew, it's so good to see you in person. Thank you for coming back to Neon Jazz.
All right,
Best
man.
of luck. And then, I'm sure we'll catch up again down the road.
Beautiful. Thanks, Joe.
Thank you. Take care.
Later.